Thank you, Catherine, for the very generous introduction. And I suppose first and foremost, I really want to extend my gratitude to the TEDx community here in UCC, and in particular, Dr. Pat Henn, for his very kind invitation to speak here today on behalf of the group that I'm involved with, which is Breaking the Silence. So Avril Quinn is my name, and I suppose the reason why I'm even here today is because a community decided to break that silence. And ultimately, the group that we have is called Breaking the Silence. And what we do is we are a community group, and we provide free suicide intervention and prevention training to all members of the community. How do we start doing that? Well, we were formed about 5 years ago in our local community in County Cork. And why were we formed? We were formed because there was a huge incidence of suicide in our local community. And naturally, our community members were extremely concerned about this very serious situation. And as the title of this talk suggests, suicide is a very tough subject, but it absolutely is everybody's business, because I think suicide in some way has affected every single person in Ireland today, and I think we'll all agree with that. So our group was formed, we came together in our grief and in our despair about 5 years ago, but ultimately with the theme of, well, how can we help the community going forward? And today, here in UCC's most beautiful granary theatre, it's all about moving forward into the future. And we can only move forward into the future when we acknowledge what the present reality is. And the present reality is that people are in difficulty in relation to mental health. And people are certainly in difficulty when it comes to suicidal thoughts and being at risk of suicide. So 5 years ago, we came together and we did a lot of research. We're very thorough around that. And our founding members, and it's very important to recognise them, they were very passionate in relation to getting this group off the ground. And without them, our group would not be here today. And we did a huge amount of research around, well, what was the best way to support the community? You know, and I suppose the outcome of our research was that suicide first aid training was going to be the best way in terms of what we could provide. So what we did was we organised for certain members of our group to be trained to deliver suicide first aid training. And they came back and they started delivering that training to every single member of our community. No qualifications needed for this training, and all this training is free of charge. So what courses do we offer? We offer the Safe Talk programme, which is suicide alertness for everybody. It's a 3-hour workshop. And we also offer the Assist programme. And the Assist programme, you might have heard of it before, is a 2-day programme. And it stands for Applied Suicide Intervention Skills Training. And it's an absolutely excellent programme. We have trained hundreds of members of our community on an annual basis over the past 5 years. And we've trained people from all walks of life. We've trained hairdressers, taxi drivers, stay-at-home parents, medics, dentists, physiotherapists, members of the Defence Forces, members of staff of multinational organisations, you named it, and we've gone in and we've done this training. And we've only been able to do this through the support that we've received from our community and the fantastic fundraising that is done for our group at local level. Without this, we would not exist. So essentially, the training that we do uses the world standard suicide intervention model. And this is developed by an organisation, a fantastic organisation called Living Works, and they are based in North America. And this is the world standard intervention model that's used in the area of suicide. It's fully recognised by the HSE and also by the World Health Organization and the Irish Medical Council. So all the accreditation is there. The model is very straightforward, but obviously you do need to be trained in a skill set. So our group has really taken off, and I suppose people have seen, you know, how we've taken responsibility back at community level in terms of doing something about suicide. And we've been very fortunate and very humbled that we've been actually invited to other communities across Cork City and County to provide this training. But at the end of the day, the message I want to kind of relay here today is that there's nothing stopping those communities in becoming trained in that skill set themselves in the communities across our gorgeous County Cork and our beautiful Cork City, and indeed across Ireland, in terms of actually empowering themselves to train their own members of their community in this skill set, because it works. And the feedback is that it does work, and you can perform interventions with people, and the majority of them will be successful, and people will move on beyond that really acute phase and move on to better things in their lives. Like, we would work with some younger people, and they would have been very, very at risk of suicide, and some of those today are back in education, they're out in the workforce, some have become parents. You know, you might deal with a couple, you know, people will be at risk when a relationship fails, financial difficulty, this type of thing. And then you intervene and you perform what's called suicide first aid to keep them alive. That's what we do. And then we connect them onto the next resource, whether the next resource be a counsellor, a psychotherapist, a psychologist, a doctor, whatever the case may be. And that's what the training is. It's suicide first aid. It's just like CPR. So ultimately, our vision would be that more communities would actually take this model and run with it. It's not breaking the silences model, it's Living Works who've developed it. But we certainly have a body of work within our group that just shows that it does actually work. And we would encourage all communities to potentially think about that. And that might sound like an enormous undertaking, and I can understand that it probably sounds like that. So the second alternative is what I would love to say from a visionary point of view today, because today's all about vision and inspiration, thought leadership. We've fantastic company here with the likes of Anya Highland, very inspirational person. But the second option I'd like to say is that every single person would be trained in suicide first aid in Ireland, and that really could be a reality. And that ultimately, to talk about education, that mental health would feature on the education curriculum at primary, second, third and fourth level. We'd really love to see something like that happen. We've gotten an awful lot of recognition as a group, and we're very lucky for that. We're very fortunate that we have a lot of support. And I suppose first and foremost, one of the first people to support us, is very important to mention his name here today, is former Justice Michael Patwell. He's a huge supporter of the work that is done. He's been very affected by suicide himself, and he's very open about that. He's written a lot of stories about that, and a lot of poetry as well. And he's a great endorser of suicide prevention. So I really wanted to recognise him today. A couple of years ago as well, we were very fortunate in the sense that the Cork senior football team approached us and wanted to do a celebrity boxing event on behalf of our group. And of course, we were delighted with the opportunity to be associated with them, because they're such positive role models in the community. And we were thrilled with that. And of course, there was funds raised as well. And all that money is used to provide free suicide intervention and prevention training. In addition to that, I suppose we featured on lots of different media campaigns. We featured in the Red FM Mind Your Mates campaign, and that was fantastic. And we featured a lot in the likes of the Cork Independent and the Cork News, some of the newer newspapers that are fantastic in terms of reporting mental health and suicide, and ultimately sparking dialogue and putting the conversation out there. And it really, really has been very beneficial from that point of view. There's a lot of positive things happening as well in the area of mental health. I mean, there's a lot of difficulty there, and it's very important to acknowledge that. But there's a lot of positive change happening today. And ultimately today you're going to hear from another fantastic person in the area, and it's P.O. Fenton from the Samaritans. And the Samaritans, their phone number is going to be low cost from next year on. So I would highly recommend the Samaritans to anybody who needs non-judgmental listening. They're excellent at what they do, and the feedback is really, really positive. Hopefully we'll have Pieta House in Cork soon as well, and Pieta House provides acute support for people who are at risk of suicide too, and that's really, really positive. So that's something that's good, that's happening as well. And I think Minister Kathleen Lynch is genuinely very passionate about the area of mental health and suicide, and she really has been very supportive of our group, and indeed she's been very complimentary of the work that's been done by Breaking the Silence. And I think if there's anybody in government who'll influence some change, it will be her. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we can't wait for government. We do need to take some control back and some power back at community level. And by doing something like this, it really is an example of what actually can happen, and how we can all be change agents and actually change the scenario on ground level and as members of the community. Because ultimately, the most important qualification that somebody would have is to be a community member and to be able to relate to somebody at human level. Because I think we've all been affected by this subject. So that's essentially my key message. It's very much around taking responsibility back at community level. I'd like to thank you all for your attention. I'd like to thank TEDx UCC again. And thank you again, and the very, very best of luck for the future. Thank you.